Good afternoon, morning, wherever you are. Welcome to How Does Sensory Processing and Self-Regulation Impact Your Child? I'm Jennifer Ruckner with Tots to Teens Therapy Services out of Prince William and Stafford counties. I'm the owner and also speech language pathologist here at Tots to Teens. And I am happy to say that I have my right hand friend and gal with me, Beth Cooper. So, Beth, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Beth Cooper. I'm an occupational therapist and also the clinical director at Tots to Teens Therapy Services. We are so excited for you to join us today. Like Jen said, today we are talking about how does sensory processing and self-regulation impact your child, because the truth is it not only impacts your child, it impacts us as adults too. So we're going to be taking a look at our sensory preferences, and hopefully you'll be thinking about yours and your child's.
So, when we think about self regulation and how our brain works, they come from two completely separate sides of our brain. So, the whole brain stem, which is that lower half there, and the red area, that is where our sensory and our self regulation is held. However, when we're talking about decision making, problem solving, all those kinds of things, those are in the frontal lobe of our brain. So those are two completely portions of our brain that need to work together in order to maintain and learn effectively.
So, what is that overall goal of sensory integration? The basic overall goal is regulation, and how that begins is through something called co regulation. And a lot of us think that kids self regulate, but really what first happens is called co regulation. And that means that an adult, a trusted adult, is helping that child to regulate. And it also means monitoring our own regulation so that we can help a kiddo to regulate. So I love this picture. It's when your calm meets their storm, co-regulation occurs. I also always like to say, don't join in their crazy. So when that kiddo is dysregulated and when they are having a really tough time, it's hard not to have an emotional reaction to that. You have to use that regulation yourself. Think of your voice, think of your body language so that you can help them to co-regulate because they're depending on you for that.
So once we have that co-regulation, that helps to up our self-regulation because then we're able to get ourselves calm and ourselves to regulate within that storm. The interesting fact about self regulation is that it varies over time. So, this is just an example or a graph of what that looks like. So, when we have our itty bitties that are coming up, there's more involvement with that co regulation piece with the caregiver, the parent, whoever it is that's with that child at the time. And so as they grow, they learn from us how to bring up that self regulation and they're less dependent on that co regulation piece. Now, that doesn't mean that as we get older, all of a sudden that co regulation piece disappears. All of us still, as adults, still have some need for co-regulation. I mean, you think about like with your spouse when you're really upset over something, oftentimes our spouse or our significant other can co-regulate us during that time because they help us to bring down our anxieties or our things that are going on at that time. So it will vary without that co-regulation and that self-regulation piece.
I think that's a perfect example also with your spouse, because I think if we think of that with a child, I know that my spouse can either co-regulate or escalate the situation. And that's the truth of our kiddos too, right? That we can either co-regulate and help them to calm, or escalate the situation too. And I've been guilty of both with spouse and child. Hmm. So, what are those main outcomes that we're looking? I think that sometimes when we talk about sensory integration and sensory processing, self regulation, it all seems like mumbo jumbo or weird science. We're really talking about that brain and brain stem and our spinal cord and all of our senses. But the main thing that we're looking at is big outcomes. We're talking about attention span, participation in activities, the child becoming independent, and communication. So, really, what we're talking about is how do we use those baseline skills of sensory processing to get to bigger outcomes, like increasing their attention span, communicating, participating. So, when we look at this, we look at that relationship first. Down here, we're looking at trust and safety. That's where it starts before we get to regulation. Because, I mean, Jen, would you be able to have somebody regulate you when you don't even know who they are?
Yeah, I'm probably going to be a little hesitant to really, I'm going to be wary. So that's going to get me on edge. So my regulation's not going to be there if I don't have that trust with them.
Mhm. Yeah, so we're looking at that, building that relationship first, and then looking at regulation, and then they can participate. Now, if they're not participating, we can go back to regulation. And if you see that they're not regulation, go back to those relationship building things, making sure that you have that relationship with the kiddo, or just bringing it down to if you have a little song that you sing together or a little high five that you do together, you're building that trust, safety, and relationship. And then you can look at regulating them so that they can participate again. So it's not just a one-way street. You're constantly going in and out of this.
So when we look at this chart, the things that are on the bottom are the groundwork that we need to have first. So, as you can tell, it's regulation. So, if we don't have that regulatory piece in place, if you go on up the chart, what you're seeing is those a lot of times the things that we're working on in school and in therapy and things like that, they're at the very peak of this triangle. And so without that regulation piece in place, we don't have that foundation to create that higher learning and those higher skills. So it's super important. And this is why I'm so glad that you're joining us today, because it's super important to figure out how to help regulate, because it is our job as parents or caregivers to do that co-regulation piece and teach them how to then be able to regulate more on their own. If we do that, then as we move up that scale on the triangle, that creates better learning in school. It gives that speech part that we're looking for, those daily living skills that they need to have. And then the thing that we all talk about is the behavior. The behavior comes right in place once a child's regulated.
Very, very true. So we've all in school heard about the five senses. You know about your five senses, but there are really eight senses. So we have your vision, your auditory, your gustatory, that means taste, olfactory, which is smell, tactile, which is your touch sense, not just your hands, but touch all over. Vestibular, proprioception, and interoception are the three that you probably have not heard of as much, but we're going to get into those and explain those senses to you.
So, our first one is that we're talking about, we'll address each one separately. But before we do that, it's important when we're looking at how we process that sensory information, we can be one of two ways. We can either be over responsive to it, which means that we respond to that small amounts of sensory information in really big ways that are kind of unexpected. Or we can be under responsive, which means it takes a whole lot of that sensory information in order for our brains and our bodies to start realizing that it's receiving that information. So when we look at each of our senses, we're going to kind of break it down into these two, over responsivity versus under responsivity. And you can kind of think through as you are listening, which ones of these do you have, but also which ones do your kiddos have, so that we can figure out how to best help with those reactions to how we receive that sensory information.
So our first one is taste. Um, our mouth is our most organizing sensory system of our body. It is, even as adults, how we regulate ourselves. If we are stressed out, we will chew on our nails or chew on a pen or eat something. It is, if we're driving in a car and we're can't stay awake, we usually will drink something cold or chew on some gum to try to regulate ourselves. We're trying to get to that just right level. But what, Jen, is the first thing that we say when a kiddo goes to put something in their mouth?
Well, that is their way of figuring out how to calm themselves down immediately.
It is, and we're often saying, "Don't get that out of your mouth,"
Yeah.
right? Like, quit putting things in your mouth, get it out of your mouth. And that, you're right, it is it's the way that it's most regulating, and it's the quickest way to get regulation. Um, so over responsive, are there any textures or foods, Jen, that you super like cannot stand, that you're over responsive to? I think I know the answer to this question,
I'm
but
pretty sure you do, because most people who know me well know it's bananas.
mhm,
I don't have a texture issue with them at all. I just really don't like the taste. I think bananas are
taste.
disgusting.
Yep. I don't really have anything that I am over responsive with the taste sense. When we get into some other senses, I definitely do. I am more under responsive, and I seek. I will double the salt. I will double the spice. I need more input in order to register it. At least that's what I tell myself. But I do like spicy foods and salty foods and really intense flavors. Um, and a lot of our kiddos that we treat that are under responsive will hear from parents, especially young ones, that the child isn't wanting to take foods right when they're starting solids. But oh my goodness, they will grab that hot Cheeto and eat it. And so their mouth needs more input in order to register, kind of ding, ding, ding. And so if you're thinking that they need that type of spicy input, if they don't have that, it's like their mouth is numb, like you've got dental work. And then feeding and eating things where you don't really know where it is, it becomes hard to manage and a little bit scary for them, since they don't have that input in order to know where their tongue and their mouth is and where the food is so that they can swallow. We definitely see our share of over responsive kiddos too. The gaggers, the pushing away, the grimacing, the turning their head. Those usually tell us that they are an over responsive kiddo.
And I love this picture of this baby, because you can tell she is definitely one of those. I know when our kids were little, we used to give them the lemon, and they would be like, oh, this is that over responsive reaction there.
Definitely. And I think she's eating a strawberry. And so when we're looking at that too, we're looking at that taste of it's probably tart. And you don't know what you're going to get. If you're going to get the sweet one or the tart one, it becomes a little unpredictable. And then you've got those little seeds on there. So it becomes a really unpredictable taste sensation too. So treating that over responsive child, what would you do, Jen, if you've got a kiddo that's gagging and is over responsive?
So, one of the things that I like to do when I get those over responsive kiddos is I like to find ways to kind of get their mouth more relaxed, more okay with there being different things in there. So I'm going to work on maybe working on a little bit of kind of uh, blowing things, bubbles, or even using a straw in the bathtub to blow bubbles in the bathtub, things like that, just to kind of get them used to that. Also, working on just some chewing, just basic chewing of, uh, you know, either some uh, gummy type things to give them that chewing, or maybe it's just maybe they need something harder, maybe they need that more crunchy chewing. Gum is a great, if you think about it, when we are over responsive, like you were saying, and we're sometimes that routine of that chewing of gum or something like that can kind of calm us.
Mhm.
And that's a great chewing type thing. The sucking's good too, like this using a straw and sucking motion. That's why if you think about babies, they use a pacifier. That's a calming thing. Same kind of concept there. Um, and then, overall, just trying to desensitize them a little bit. So giving them some oral motor massages, those kinds of things, just to kind of calm their system down a little bit.
Mhm.
These are things that, we also might want to, especially if we're seeing a lot of gagging and maybe even possible choking. This is time for us to look at, is it a sensory thing going on here, or is there something functionally? So, this is when a feeding evaluation would be a really great time for us to get one of a feeding evaluation from either a SLP, a speech language pathologist, or an OT. Um, Also, lollipops, that's that sucking. That's really good. And it's sort of the same kind of thing, thought process as the gum. Is it, like I said, the pacifier calming. There are some great lollipops. We're big proponents of no dum dum pops, and I'll tell you why. It's because the little ball on the dum dum pop is just that right size to get in the little throats of our kiddos. So we really like Zollipops, because Zollipops they're dye free, they're sugar free, they're gluten free. They're free of everything. You can find them at Walgreens. I don't get paid from Zollipops or from Walgreens, but
I'm beginning to doubt that.
but we do really love them because they're a flatter lollipop for one thing, so we don't worry as much. Anytime you put anything in their mouth, you worry about choking hazards and things like that. But because it's a flat and it's a pretty, good size, we don't worry so much with that.
Okay. And then treating that kiddo that is under responsive, the one that needs more input. You're going to see that there are some crossover between the two. It's just the way in which we're using it. So we love these P's and Q's for that chewing too. They're really intense. You can get some good bite down and tugs, so they get that good input to their jaw. Giving them, if you're sending them to school, I love the camelbacks that they have to bite and chew and suck because it gives them input. It also is something where they're starting to get that oral motor input throughout the day, that they can have their water bottle on them, they can chew on it and get that drink too. Because as we said, the mouth is the most organizing part of our body, and they go most of the school day without something in their mouth. And you'll start to watch the pencils come home chewed up or their shirt chewed up. They're really seeking that input through their mouth. Um, this one is just a bit of refrigerator tubing on the end of a pencil so that they chew on that instead of their pencil. Getting them involved in cooking so they get that full sensory experience with it, to increase the input that they're getting. A vibrating toothbrush is a great way to add some extra input. You can do some lollipops with strong tastes. Like Jen said, the Zollipops are awesome. You can choose the ones that are a little bit more tart or sweet and prep their mouth first. so that they get all of that input and know where their mouth is in space, so that then they feel safer with eating things that may be a little more bland to them. So cold, vibration, and strong taste can wake up that mouth so that then they are ready to go to eat other foods. Gum, again, it's a great tool, as Jen said, for jaw strengthening, chewing, also just calming. Also, it's going to give those kids that need that constant input some nice input to um, keep their mouth satisfied. Uh, Tongue movement activities, getting them exercising their mouth. We love for the little ones making edible dough, because they're going to put it in their mouth. So making sure that whatever you're giving them, they're able to eat as well, because it's going to end up in their mouth if they are under responsive and seeking that input. Also, they have great options for jewelry anymore that you can put around their neck so that they're getting that throughout the day as well.
These are our kiddos too, Beth, that, they're the ones that every single thing that they come in contact with, or most things they come in contact with, they pretty much end up in the mouth. So that's our big clue for our under responsive kiddos.
They are really just looking for something to give them that input.
hmm All right. So smell and olfactory. So this one, I'm going to give you an example first, and then we can kind of dive into it a little bit more. But, have you ever gone into like a place that's not maybe somewhere you're super familiar with, but then you get that whiff of something and you're like, and it takes you back in time to something that really was something you love, like it reminded you of your grandma or something like that. Well, this is that piece. We all know about smells and how they can impact us, but it can also influence our feelings and our perceptions that we neurologically are made up with. And so we are hardwired to perceive those smells and sometimes have a very emotional reaction to those smells. So when we are looking at over responsive versus under responsive, I'll just say from my own standpoint, once again, I'm an over responsive person. I'm very sensitive to perfumes and lotion scents. They give me a really bad headache a lot of times. And so, that's something that, keep in mind with our kiddos, because they might not be able to communicate that, but those smells can really cause all of us to have those kind of visceral type reactions because of that over responsivity. Beth, do you have either over responsive or under responsive?
I'm over responsive as well, like you. And I have some scents that are linked with, well, I have some scents that just bother me in general. They give me migraines. But then I have certain scents that, like a certain cologne, that will remind me immediately of like an ex-boyfriend that puts you back in that space emotionally. And so you can be triggered by smells, or smells can make me mad. That I really do not like the smell of lavender. And my husband kept buying the garbage bags with the lavender scents, and it made me actually mad. The smell would make me mad. So that emotional reaction, and I see it with kids too, of they'll smell something and you'll just all of a sudden see behaviors and you don't even know where it came from, because that smell was super reactive to them. My son, though, is under responsive to smells, and he would grab like all of my any essential oil bottles and smell them. When he was little, he loved to smell people's hair. Um, he would be a hair smeller of babies. He still will put on too much cologne because he's at that teenage age and he doesn't realize that it's too much and it's killing all of us. Um, but yeah, so I'm more over responsive and he would be more under responsive. Were you more over responsive, Jen?
I
Yeah.
am definitely more over responsive, but there are times that there's a smell that makes me really, like like baby's hair. So,
Babies.
oh, I'm definitely at that grandma stage. So wanting to be at that grandma stage. Yeah, there's certain things like that that just give me that comfort. So I could have, this is another thing that we need to keep in mind too. Sometimes we can be a little bit of both. We can have a little bit of both of these. We can be a
Period.
little, and it depends on the situation. It depends on kind of where we are too.
And that smell and that memory put with it too, because I can smell something that reminds me of my grandma's house, or cinnamon that makes, I love cinnamon and orange and citrus. Um, and so, yeah, I could see where I'm both too, but there are definitely some certain smells that I am a little overreactive to.
So when we're looking at treating that over responsive kids, we've already mentioned this, the perfumes, the cleaning products, even lotions, because there's a lot of perfumes and lotions. Just being really careful about that. When we hire a therapist with us, that is one of the things that we like to remind them because, we don't ever know when something that we are wearing that has a scent to it is going to be, to provoke some of that regulation discord with some of our kiddos. You can do those like scent circles, like these little hearts where you have a scent in them. It could be something that the parent wears. It could be, one of those like essential oils that Beth was speaking of a minute ago, because you can put, vanilla or, whatever is a relaxing type scent for them. You could put that in there. Scentsy, I know, had them for a while, and I think they still do. And some of the other companies have like the stuffed animals that you can put a scent in as well for them to cuddle and love on and that kind of thing. But the biggest thing is just to be prepared, because um, we don't always know when those things are going to happen. Like we said, it can go between the two a lot of times with smell. So just being prepared to have those items that are the calming items ready, so that if there is an adversive one, that we can kind of taper it down.
Definitely. I had a kiddo that was super over responsive to smells. And so we came up with a plan that he would take his favorite scent and he kept it on one of the felt little circles and kept it in his pocket, so that whenever something was aversive, he could pull out something and have that on his body to where he could get through it then. That preparation piece is huge. And then treating that under responsive kiddo, how do we get them more input so that they can register it, so they're not smelling other kids' hair when they're walking around? So using some scented lotion, you can use Old Spice containers for a scent box, and if you're in a classroom or even at home, using essential oils. Generally, citrus and peppermint are alerting ones. That's going to wake you up. Lavender and rose are calming, unless you're me, then it's going to make me angry. But vanilla is also a calming one too. Scented markers, Play-Doh, there's scented stickers now, bubbles. You just have to know the kiddo and know if they are a seeker of smell, are they also a seeker of taste? And so are those scented markers going to end up in their mouth? And making that right choice too of how to meet that need. You can also put some scents into your sensory bins. I know sometimes we'll do like a rice bin and put a little bit of essential oil in there to increase the smell with a more neutral smell too.
All right, so vision. We always equate the vision with like how well we see, right? 2020, what it's all about. But it's actually more about the muscles in our eyes and then how our brain actually processes what it is that we're seeing. So it's visual perception more than it is actual how well we're seeing things. So what does it look like to be over responsive versus under responsive? So if you're looking at this picture right now, and you're like, whoa, and you're turning away or any of that kind of stuff, you're going to be a little over responsive. But if you're like, wow, this is the coolest thing ever, and you can stare at it and not have any issues, and you just can't look away, then you're probably on that under responsive side. I have to say, we're giving all of our secrets away about ourselves here, but I am tending to, I'm more on the over responsive side again. Lights, especially flickering lights, tend to cause migraines and things like that. So when we are planning things in our clinics, one of the things that we're super conscious of are the lights that are in the clinics. If you've got fluorescent lights or you have any light bulbs that are about to go out and they start flickering, those of us who are over responsive are going to have a lot of issues with this because it's going to trigger those eye muscles and that brain's just going to start going crazy. A lot of times for some people, it's going to cause headaches, migraines, those kinds of things. So, but for our kiddos that really, they love the lights and they're the ones that we get the little things that you can push and the light comes on and it's super bright, or we have a little it's like the things that you put on at night that have the little stars that go all around the room, those kinds of things. Those are for our under responsive kids that we use those for. So those are
Yeah.
the things that we look at.
Watching fans, that's always
Oh,
those
why?
yeah, under responsive kiddos are always the fan watchers, which I'm with you, Jen, I'm totally over responsive, and it probably comes down to even the clothes I pick too, that I will wear more muted clothing too, just because I get visually overwhelmed, and, like, when I'm driving too, like, bright lights and things like that will be overwhelming to me. So treating that over responsive child or over responsive Jen and Beth, what do we do? Decreasing screen time. That's a lot of visual information coming in, and they um, can be really focused on it. And then you're going to see behaviors later because they're so visually overwhelmed by it, and they can become dysregulated. Decreasing pattern clothing and socks. Just like I choose more muted colors or less patterning. Um, this is really important. And as Jen said, we use this in the clinic a lot, is decreasing clutter. There's actually really great research out there about classrooms and bedrooms and how children do better with less decoration, less things on the wall. It's a calmer environment. Using greens and blues, those colors are calming and the easiest to regulate. Actually, green is generally for kiddos with ADHD and autism. You'll find it's a higher prevalence of it being their favorite color because green is actually the easiest color to process. Actually, being out in a green environments leads to increased attention span in the research too. That spending 30 minutes out in a green environment equated to the same as a 30 minutes of that equated to the same as a pill of Ritalin in increasing attention span. So that green gives us our dopamine. It gives us the input that we need to attend. And we can trick that a little bit. It's not as much being outside, but we can trick that by using greens and blues and more natural colors indoors too. We do have some fluorescent lighting in one of our clinics. And so we've used covers for the fluorescent lightings to dim them. That's an easy solution that you can use at home or at school, just making sure that you're getting the right ones for fire safety. Making sure that a lot of times what I'll know, a hint to me, especially with babies and toddlers, that they are visually overstimulated, that they are over responsive, is that you'll put out their food and they'll swipe it off their tray, that it becomes too much. They're the food swipers. And you give one and they can eat it one by one. And that just tells us that their brain is able to process small things at once. So decreasing the clutter in their room, decreasing the clutter in their workspace can help. Also, then calming things like the lava lamps, bubble tubes, calming lights, aquariums, things where they can slowly process. You're not going to want a lot of flashing things with a lot of input or scenes changing quickly. A lot of our cartoons have scenes changing really quickly, and there are some Other things that people can watch that moves more slowly, like Baby First TV or the PBS shows that move a little bit slower visually that won't be as dysregulating.
So for those under responsive kids, we want more input. So the busier things are what we're looking for. So there's a lot of, for the older kids, a lot of great games and things like that, like mazes and I Spy games, anything that they've got to visually scan through and try to find something in a clutter of different, you know, on a picture or in a book. Those drive me insane because I can't do those very well. But these are what we need for our older, under responsive kiddos. Like Beth said, patterns and colors really do rev up our visual side of things. So, brightly colored things, having a lot of different patterns on the clothing, or maybe this is in the bedroom, this could be something that we're looking like, you can put things on the wall that have their favorite characters or whatever on there, but that have a lot of input. um Also, there are brightly colored tapes, and some of them have the reflection on them, just to help with drawing the attention and their visual attention to, like, stairs as they're going up and things like that. This is one of the things that is really important, is the lighting, because they're the ones that will be good with flashlights and those laser pointers and little pointer things. They're also fine with, like, the strobe light things, where I can't be in a room with strobe lights. So this is really good for those under responsive kids, and it with the flashlights and the pointers, it's really great because it can draw attention more to what you're trying to get them to do visually. It helps them to attend to that. Um, but as you saw on the other side of things, which is the over responsive, it's also true that we try to keep the table cleared off and not have a lot of clutter and things like that on the table, because we want them to be able to focus on whatever the work is that they're doing. And the only way to do that is to make sure that their work area is kind of free of a lot of visual input at one time.
So our next area is auditory. And just like Jen talked about, that our vision isn't just about our acuity, it's about our processing, the same as with hearing. It's not just about how well you hear, but also what your brain processes that you're hearing. And that can bring about emotional states too. So music can be an amazing tool for regulation and engagement. It can bring up some feelings. I'm sure you've heard songs and it just starts to bring tears. So it can be a really nice tool to use for regulation. So what does it look like to be over responsive when the sounds are just bigger, and then other people are perceiving them to be? So this to me reminds me of like flushing toilets. The kiddos that have a lot of hard times with blenders, vacuums, flushing toilets, unexpected noises. You'll see the ears or the bracing one on their shoulder so they can still do it while they're covering their ears. That is what it would look like to be over responsive. To be under responsive is those kiddos that have the TV up really high, that they're just not processing it, hearing it. You may be calling their name over and over and over and over, and they're just not registering it. I think that I used to be over responsive, Jen, but I think that having children has made me under responsive because I think things can be going on around me and I'm just not even registering at all. I think my brain has just been, it was over responsive for a long time and it just shut off now to where I'm super under responsive. Do you have a sensory preference with this one, or are you pretty typical developing?
Nah, believe it or not, I'm pretty typically developing on this one. I
Oh,
don't
you're a
lean one
speech
way or the other.
pathologist.
I know, I've got to be very in between. But I will say my daughter-in-law really, she's more that over responsive. We have a dog that has a higher pitch bark. And so, it really bugs her. And like you, I just sort of, okay, doesn't really bother me, but for her, it has been very um, much of a too loud, at one time type thing. So, yeah,
Yeah.
there's definitely our kiddos that react to those sounds. And with that, there's definitely things that we can do for those over responsive kiddos, earplugs, headphones, anything that's going to damper that sound for them. Those are going to be really, really great because it gives them like that preparation for those sounds before it becomes a sound. We have a friend that comes to our clinic, and he helps us out and does some things around the clinic. And one of his tasks is to vacuum the flooring. And so he really doesn't like this job. And the reason he doesn't like it is because he's got that over responsivity to auditory sounds. But he wears headphones. He'll go get his headphones and he'll put those on, and then he'll vacuum around the clinic, and does a really great job with that. So any kind of dampering would be good. Whenever it's possible, kids with that auditory over responsivity, either turning the music down or just having it completely off, that's going to be something that's super important. But if we're able to, the best thing to do is let them be in control of that volume so that they can determine what that good medium is for them. Um, Slower beat music is going to be the best. So something like classical music, or even just taking a song. There's a lot of music out there that'll be a typical song that we hear at a certain speed, and they'll slow it down a little bit so that it's a little easier and smoother flowing. Um, if you've ever been like in an elevator and you're like, I think I know that song, but it's like a rock song and they've now made it into an elevator music song, that's an example of a way that you could do that.
So treating that under responsive kiddo. Oh, I jumped one ahead. Um, letting them, how do we get them more input in an appropriate way? Letting them wear headphones with their preferred music in the home and the community. They may need that input in order to engage. They may need that increased auditory input in order to be at their just right level. So giving them more input in that way, in a way that impacts just them and not everybody around them too. Providing that wait time to take in directions. If they are hearing it the first time, they may just take a little bit longer for it to register for them. Also, if you can give a physical prompt or a visual prompt, so pointing to where you need them to go, or a sign when you're saying it, or tapping them gently before you give them the information so that they know that you are that you're getting ready to say something or to give a direction. You can also do visual schedules with them if they're not so great with registering that auditory input of directions, giving them that visual schedule with it. Percussion and beats and drumming, letting them have a drum set where they can get that input. And the more that they get it and the more they get that need met, the less they'll need it as they get older as well.
So this is one of those areas that you might have heard the name vestibular, but you weren't really sure, what it was. Or maybe a therapist has used this with you regarding what your child might need. So, what that involves is our balance and our movement. Those are the main things. As you can tell by our little picture in the upper corner, it looks kind of like yoga. It's where our inner ear is being able to create that balance and that movement. Now, if you've ever had an ear infection, or you're motion sick, or you've had vertigo, even sometimes allergies, that inner ear gets kind of thrown off. And the effects of that can be dizziness, nausea, um, just stomach aches, just feeling nasty basically is it really throws your whole system off because you're not able to get your equilibrium where it needs to be in order to maintain a regular movement or even to balance yourself in normal ways that to us we just kind of take for granted. Um, but that's what allows us, the vestibular system is what allows us to move efficiently, but also very smoothly. I love this picture that Beth found with the little guy on the Roomba going round and round. It's just so funny. For me, I can watch him go around about once, and then I have to kind of look away and then come back. And that kind of, I'm not a huge motion sickness person, but that round and round motion does get to me after a while. I have one child who can't ride on any kind of rides that go round and round because it makes them nauseous. I don't know if you've been at an amusement park and you've had that same visceral type reaction,
Mhm.
right?
I'm super over responsive. And I have half of my kids are super over responsive and get motion sick and do not seek movement in that way at all. And then I have some seekers that are looking for more intense input, that which is interesting. I would put you more in that adrenaline seeking movement thing too category. But I think
I
the
am.
visual piece of it's funny because you mentioned the vision of
Yeah.
watching it makes you sick, and that vision and that vestibular are so highly linked. So do you think it's more the vision that makes you sick than the movement?
Yeah, I do. I think it's probably more the vision. And that's, we're going to address this in a minute that sometimes these things can go together, and sometimes like we said earlier, sometimes you can have one at one point and one at another point. So it's always good to kind of keep an idea with your child that, you know, something that works once might not work the next time because it does adjust from time to time.
You're quite the adrenaline junkie, aren't you?
I am the adrenaline junkie. Well, we're going to talk about that in just a second, and I can address why I think I might fall into the more under responsive in a sec.
Okay, so there's different types of vestibular input. There is, so we're just talking about movement in space. And so there's straight line back and forth. Think about pushing on a swing, and that is the most calming. There's circular, which if you think about like the sun and the earth, just more circular. And then there's spinning, which is the most alerting. Input. We will get into spinning in just a little bit, but generally my go-to is that straight line back and forth calming. Um, Now, as far as another type of vestibular input is that upside down head. And it's a powerful, quick dose of dopamine to the brain. And dopamine is what regulates our attention. That is, if we can get our kids upside down a little bit, and you'll see those kiddos that have trouble attending, generally you'll go out to the playground and they will be hanging upside down because their body is just seeking that input and that dopamine. So if you can get them upside down, bowling upside down, or getting upside down in some way, hanging upside down, that can help regulate at the attention span. So 15 minutes of vestibular input can have a lasting effect on brain chemistry. That's what we're talking about. When we're talking about sensory, we're talking about the brain chemistry. You saw that initial picture with the sensory processing kind of all over. And we're really regulating that serotonin and dopamine and norepinephrine, all those brain chemicals. And this is where I get really geeked out about it. But that vestibular input can, just 15 minutes of it can impact us for 6 to 8 hours of the day, good or bad. So it can help to regulate a kid and increase their attention span and have some of that impact for 6 to 8 hours. It also could completely dysregulate a kid. And you could be seeing meltdowns 5, 6 hours later that was related to that initial vestibular input. So it's something you just have to be really careful about and know your kiddo's sensory profile and know how it impacts them and just being super aware.
So when we're looking at our over responsive vestibular kiddos, like Beth said, that straight line of back and forth or up and down, that's the best type of movement. So swings that go back and forth, the jumping up and down on trampolines, scooter boards being rolled back and forth, those kinds of things. Those are really regulating for our kiddos. Sometimes because there is that dysregulation, they feel kind of off, their balance gets put off if they're putting their head backwards. A lot of times, this is why a shower will work better than like a kiddo in the bath. So, like if your kiddo's having trouble when you go to lean them back to wash their hair, maybe try a shower instead, because it might be that vestibular that's giving them that false balance feeling and it's freaking them out. So trying a shower in place of a bath would be good. A lot of times these are the kids that want to be in those really tight spaces. So, like, we've got an example of one of the cocoon swings here, that they like to have that secure feeling. Any kind of lycra tunnels are good during it with this. You could also like little teepees or little tents, things like that. Those are good. And then, making sure that we respect those fears, because, when you're off balance, it's not a great feeling when you don't have that um, ability to regulate your balance. It's very, and like I said, it can cause such visceral, um, the nausea and things like that as a secondary, and nobody likes that. But some things that you can eat or smell that are good, but mainly eat, are things like peppermint. That's very calming for a system, very good for your, for nausea. So is ginger. There's little ginger candies that you can have as well. Also, I want to go back real quick because I want to talk about this picture that's up here at the top. It's an example of two different children sitting in adaptive seating, like a high chair. Okay. So it's super important that when our children are in a seated position, that they have their feet firmly set. This is a big part of vestibular. So, like, if they're on a toilet, are their feet just dangling like this one little kiddo with nothing under them? Because we want to have a stool to give them that helps create that balance. Also, sitting in a high chair, it could be even if they're in like on a scooter or something like that, making sure their feet are firmly on the ground, but when they're doing it, those kinds of things, so that they've got that balance and creates that firmness under their feet.
And treating that under responsive, that kiddo that needs more input to register. I would say this is um the area that we see the most, is that a kiddo can't sit and attend because they're constantly seeking vestibular input, that they are looking for that movement. And without it, they can't regulate in order to attend. So, how do we create more opportunities for movement in their day? Some things that we do is add a move and sit. That's just, I use a cheaper version that's those balance discs down here. You can get them anywhere, any sporting store or Target. You can also use a camping pillow. What that does, it sits under their bottom and just gives them a little bit of input while they are sitting, to give them just a little bit of vestibular. Making sure that they're getting frequent movement breaks. The second that you're telling them to sit and attend and they haven't met their quota of vestibular, all they're doing is thinking about sitting still and not what you're teaching. And so making sure they get up and they're able to move and get that vestibular input so that they can sit back down and be at that just right level for learning. Scooter boards are great for getting vestibular input, especially on a ramp. Getting that input, that sounds like a nightmare to me, but kiddos that need that input will love it, and it will give their brain exactly what they need in order to stay regulated. At home, I have a lot of people that will install um, swings into their ceilings, and we have so many more options now than we used to in this area. Sensory has become more widely understood, and sensory items have become more widely available. So even if you go on Amazon, you can find a C-frame swing, just a standalone, or you can find the attachments to put into a beam to help. Um, I used to carry around in my car a piece of Lycra that you can swing either in a blanket or in a piece of Lycra and swing. Vestibular is right in that inner ear where Jen said, and which is also attached to our hearing and speech centers then too. And that vestibular input is how we get a lot of kids their first words too, is that we stimulate that vestibular part of their inner ear and brain, and it stimulates speech development too. So we will swing a kid and we'll work on getting them to request more, or we'll hear more verbalizations when we are getting them to swing and get that input. There's options for door frame swings. I have one called the Gorilla Gym. I love it. It's pretty affordable. I think, Jen, you found one at BJ's, right? And it's on Amazon too. Gorilla Gym can go in a doorway if you don't have the option for the room for a C frame, or you can't add in ceiling hardware. In your community, outside, swings, playgrounds, trampolines, skate parks, hills, rolling down hills, that just being outside, you're getting double that dose. You're getting that nice green visual that we talked about, plus the vestibular. I also love this idea of that blanket underneath the table. You can find little ways of getting a kiddo in a swing if you're only one person, and getting them to get that input without really high-tech devices too.
So going back to your question about
Yes, Jen.
under responsivity, this is when those thrill rides, the ones that go have the big, like roller coasters or zip lines or things like that, because you're getting basically that same motion. And so those kids that are daredevils and things like that, as we used to call, as I was used to be called,
Yeah.
are those kids who are doing those things. They're the ones that are on the monkey bar rings and doing flips and things like that. They're trying to get all of those things that Beth was just talking about, that upside down, the whole dopamine rush, those kinds of things. So that is one thing for sure. If you have a kiddo that loves a lot of activity and
Yes.
loves being upside down, this is that under responsiveness.
And speaking of roller coasters, I have one of my kiddos is super over responsive to vestibular input, but as parents, we decided it was a really good idea to put him on a roller coaster. And a few years ago, and his system was so wiped out when he got out of it. We started seeing hiccups. That's a sign of sensory overload, is hiccups. And he couldn't stand upright for 30 minutes past the roller his legs just would not, he had no sense of self and spatial awareness because we wiped out his vestibular system. So we've learned he'll never go on another one, but he was so dysregulated in those signs of hiccups. Now, an under responsive kiddo is going to get off there feeling like their best self, right? Like, is that how you feel after?
I do. When I zip line through the rainforest when I was down in Costa Rica, it was like, I loved it. And I wanted to just do more. That's the thing. They
Yeah.
want to do more and more and more. And with that, you have to be super careful because, like Beth said, there is a threshold, and then we're going to go into where they're going to be over responsive. And so finding that good. We had one little guy years ago that it was a very, very thin line between being under responsive and then over responsive. And so we had to watch his reactions and how he was it was usually with swinging, because he loved to swing in the blanket. And there would come a time that we knew, okay, he's almost there, so we got to stop, or it's going to go to that other be too much at that point.
And that's a really good point because we talk a lot as therapists about increasing their threshold. That's a key word that we talk about. And it's just what Jen's saying is that our kiddos that have those sensory processing differences, usually their threshold is very small. And so it is just right, too much, like, and you don't, or not enough, just right, too much. Like it's a very small threshold. And so making their days really sensory rich and figuring out those right levels that increases that just right feeling. So I think that sometimes can drive parents crazy too of they were doing great and they were seeking it and then all of a sudden it's too much. So I think that swinging is a great example of it can be both and it can be a fine line to walk and most of the time is with our kiddos with sensory processing disorder. All right, tactile. Jen, you want to talk about tactile?
I can.
Does this just drive you nuts watching this?
From a cleaning standpoint, absolutely it does. From a tactile standpoint, though, it's awesome. I love seeing little ones do this kind of thing. Um, Basically, tactile, like Beth said, is every kind of touching. It's not just with the hands, hugging, and the whole bit. We'll get into that a little bit more. But this is the very first sensory system to operate in utero because they're obviously cuddled in the nice little oven that they're in. And so this is that very first sensory system. Um, so Beth, what do you think? Is this little guy a over responsive or an under responsive?
I would say he is under responsive. And as an OT, I love seeing this. As a parent, it makes me cringe.
Yeah,
Because
sometimes we have a very thin line between those two things, don't we?
I just don't want to clean it up.
Exactly.
Great development, great experience. I don't want to clean this up.
Exactly. So my son was exactly the opposite. He would not ever have done this because he did not like anything on his hands, even food or anything. He was immediately like wiping them off or wanting a napkin. So he was definitely the over responsive piece of this.
And so treating that over responsive kiddo, what would we like Jen's son? What would we do? The kiddo that wants the constant cleanness, wants to wipe off their hands. We're going to here's the deal with sensory processing disorder. We're always going to respect their sensory profile. You're never going to force somebody into being okay with something that they're not, because it actually talked about the brain and the brainstem and regulation. It's actually putting their brain into fight or flight, that this is not okay, this is not safe. And there's really not a lot that you can just force someone into being okay with in this area. We can work on getting them used to it, but it's not something that can just be forced. So adapting tasks, does it really need to have a glue bottle that's messy, or can we just do a glue stick? Can we have a paintbrush available? If it does need to be glue, can we use a paintbrush to where they don't have to get their hands in it, or they don't have to finger paint? They can use a paintbrush. Giving them nice deep pressure input to their hands, really massaging those hands so that they get used to input in a calming way. Sensory friendly clothing. So this is where this type of kiddo, you are going to be hearing the tag, or might seem in my sock. That's the most drama in the morning, kiddos getting ready. We are so lucky though now that there is sensory friendly clothing is more widely available. It used to be that you had to buy it from specialty shops. And now you can go to Target and their whole Cat and Jack line is sensory friendly with soft fabrics, less seams, tagless, stretchy waistbands, limited compression clothing, so things that are a little bit tighter, that give them that nice hug instead of being our kiddos that are over responsive to tactile, sometimes having something loose on their body or arms, that constant rubbing is really bothersome to them. Interesting fact about tactile is in the brain and spinal cord, that tactile and touch and pain are really closely linked. So sometimes it's misregistered as pain. So I know I don't like light touch at all. It drives me crazy, but I will take a deep, hard massage because I can process that better. Jen, you're kind of the opposite, right? That
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I love being hugged. I mean, I'm pretty touchy feely as a person anyway. If you come to me, I'm going to love on you. That's just the way I am. And I think that kind of goes with that more under responsiveness. Um, I can go either way. I was just thinking though with this, Beth, with over responsive, we could relate it to like when we have a piece of clothing or something on and something's just not right and we're always like trying to readjust it and it's bothering us. I mean, it might be just a little tiny thing, but think about it. It drives you crazy all day long because all you can think about is why this sweater isn't fitting the way it's supposed to. Or
right, and you're not learning, you're not engaged because you're bothered by that tactile sense. It really can be overwhelming. And
Mhm.
it's just funny because I am super okay with hugs and deep pressure, but that light touch for me, but we do have to be careful with those kiddos with where they are in line. Do they need to be at the front of the line, the back of the line? Because those bumps and being touched lightly or hard by a peer could cause an emotional reaction. Also, sometimes these kiddos can't handle like different soaps and things in the bathroom tactily that just drives them a little nuts. And the thing with sensory processing is that some days you can handle it depending how big full your cup is, and sometimes you can't. Just if you're stressed and overwhelmed and your cup is full, sometimes some of these things might drive you more crazy than it would on another day. It's really important. I know if I'm doing a craft or something messy play wise with a kiddo that is over responsive, I've got an escape plan and I'm okay with it if they need to use it. I've got a towel or a paper towel and they need to wipe their hands. I let them know that this is a safe place. I'm never going to surprise you with something. I'm not going to force you to keep something on your hands. I'm proud of them for exploring it and we have an escape plan to get rid of it too.
Sometimes these might be the kiddos too, Beth, right? That they want deep pressure, but they don't always want it from another person.
Yes, very correct. That they want to be able to control it themselves. You're exactly right. And that's true with all sensory input is that self-imposed sensory input is much easier to take than somebody imposing it on you. So I think about our kiddos that have feeding difficulties and that it's sensory based, that once we can get them feeding themselves, we have a lot more success than somebody coming at them with a fork or a spoon or feeding them. And that's the same way is that they may be the squisher and getting in the crash pad and getting underneath the couch cushions and looking for that touch and pressure, but they don't want it from somebody else because they want to be able to control it. I think we talked on the auditory part about having difficulty with like sounds and like blenders and things like that and giving them control of turning it on and off, just so that they have that control over it. And I like to say to parents a lot of times, our kiddos with sensory processing problems, their life is so unpredictable because they're not registering things in the same ways as other people, that the more control they can have, the better because it becomes more predictable to them. And we'll talk a little bit more about that with routines later. Uh, but also, they can become very controlling too, because out of survival that they want to control their environment too to make it safe for them. So finding that just right balance with that as well.
So the under responsive kiddo. So, these are the kids that, they might they're not going to understand temperature. So we have to be super careful, especially in water, like in the bath. If it's really, really hot, they might not even register that until it's like scalding and then it's burning them. So we have to be really careful with these kiddos, especially with temperature. The same could be true the opposite way with the cold. They might not be able to regulate how cold it is. So keeping that in mind with our under responsive kiddos. Also, there's lots of ways that we can provide that tactile stimulation that they really love. As we saw with the little boy on the front, it was with like kind of like a shaving cream or a whipped cream, something like that. And he was just all over the place. Those kids are going to love those kinds of things. Any kind of sensory bends that they can get their hands in there and feel everything, they're going to be all into this because it gives them a lot of that tactile input. Um, Massages with lotion. I just had a little guy this summer that we've been doing this little grant at one of the preschools locally, and he is totally an under responsive kid. He was just like that kiddo on our first video at the video, and he would, if you give him a little squirt of lotion, and I mean he's like all over himself. Yeah, he loves it. So that is definitely something they love, is that lotion and massage and all of that. Anything they can squeeze with their hands, like putty or slime or Play-Doh or anything like that. Just keep in mind though, if they've got the oral side and the taste side, they might try to put it in their mouth. So just be careful with that. Messy play. That's what we were just talking about with the shaving cream with the glue. You can make, it's basically like a slime type thing. Or monster hands, the big, how do you describe this one? The monster
The
hands
monster
one.
hands, just when you're getting it's using all of the like paint and things like that, and you're gonna cover your whole thing and have monster hands. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, clean mud. I'm not sure. um,
There's a recipe for it. We
there
can do
is.
a recipe too. It's not super clean
It's
though.
not, I always put that in quotes because it's not clean. That's
It's
why they
got
call it
soap
mud.
involved. It's got
Yeah,
soap.
exactly. Exactly. And then things that have that texture to it. There's so many great books out there nowadays that have like the animals and they all have different textures on each page, things like that. But also Velcro, anything with Velcro, they love that. Fidgets, there's tons of fidgets. I know those have taken off like nobody's business. And for kids in school, there have been accommodations made for kids to now have fidgets so that they are able to do that. Before fidgets were a thing, way back when I first started working, we created our own version of fidgets, like marbles in somebody's pocket, so that when they needed that tactile stimulation, they were able to put their hands in their pocket and kind of roll the marbles around, or have a piece of Velcro on the side of their pants so that they could rub their hand on it, or under a desk so that they could rub their hand on. I mean, we created our own fidgets. We just didn't know that that was what they were called back then. Now they've got like
Now they're
actual
fancy.
yeah, all kinds of fancy fidgets. Um, so deep pressure is still super important for these kiddos. Those, big bear hugs as tight as you can get them. Massages of any kind are great for these kiddos. Hand hugs, doing that. As you see in the picture, the Under Armour or some kind of uh, those stretchy shirts that are going to fit like a glove. There's much cheaper versions out there than Under Armour nowadays, so that's good. There's like a Champion brand that I think's at Target or somewhere like that, but a lot of good to create that deep pressure for our kiddos.
So proprioception, what are we talking about when we hear the word proprioception? It's one of those hidden senses that's really not talked about a lot unless you're in the therapy world. So I want you right now to close your eyes, and I want you to know, Jen, without moving, do you know where your hand is? Your
I
right
do.
hand. Your right
Yes.
hand. And that is, she's not visualizing it. You can open your eyes. She's not visualizing it, but she has something called proprioception. It lets us know where our body is in space. And we have proprioceptors that are inside of our joints, and we can activate those by pushing, pulling, and carrying things using heavy items. And that helps us to know where our body is in space. To be under responsive, I describe this as if your foot is asleep. If your foot is asleep, you're not getting proprioceptive feedback. You're not getting enough input to know where it is in space. So, what do you do, Jen, if your foot's asleep?
I'm going to start moving it. I'm going to start shaking it, try to get it awake.
Right, because it doesn't feel comfortable and your body doesn't feel safe. So our kiddos that are under responsive feel like their body is asleep. They're not getting input about where their body is in space. Yes.
Beth, I have a question.
Yes.
This whole time we've been doing both. We have two questions, but this one, why do we only have the one question?
Well, can you be too aware of where your body is in space?
I guess not.
I guess not. You'd just be an elite athlete, probably being able to manipulate your body, knowing where it is in space. So yeah, you're right. That's only under responsive with for the proprioception. And those kiddos that are usually seeking movement to figure out where they are in space. So that's also where those start to cross, right? That we're talking about. Proprioception tells us where our body is. Vestibular, that movement one, tells us where we are in space in our environment.
All right. So for our under responsive kiddos, there's so many great things that we can do with these kiddos, and you're going to see a lot of crossover, like Beth said, with that vestibular. If you look down at the wheelbarrow walking going on, that's doing both of those because they're able to get that pressure in their upper body, but they're also kind of with that head down going on. So it's helping, with that vestibular as well. Wall push-ups. That's where they basically just stand up against the wall and they're just pushing like the push-ups that you would do, but you're up against a wall. And this is a great time for things that are weighted. So pushing or pulling. So if they have, like you can see the kids on the top row, which happened to be Beth's kiddos when they were little, she's pulling him and he's weighting that little wagon down. But if you don't have another kiddo that you can use, you can always put get some beans in a big bag, at the grocery, the uncooked beans, and you can put those in there. Anything that's going to give that weight, and it's going to you're going to have the same responsiveness with that. There's, toys nowadays that have the beans and things in them. So they're heavier stuffed animals and things like that you can also use. There's tons of weighted things now on the market that we never had when my kids were little. So I have one of my daughters who loves weighted blankets, and I put it on me, and I felt like it was like it's suffocating me. It was, so heavy. So, for our kids, they really need that weight and that input. Scooter board activities, that's really good because they're getting, you could sit up on it, you can go on your belly. So they're getting different ways to really get the way that their body is in space. And then, like we said, the wheelbarrow walking, swaddling and massaging, those are always great things. They're getting that kind of, once again, that deep pressure of keeping them all together. Yoga, awesome. I'm a big fan. Biting and chewing. Remember, we talked about this at the very beginning when we were talking about all of our oral motor, that the mouth is one of the most regulating parts of our body. So when we're trying to figure out where our body is in space, regulating ourselves with the biting and chewing also helps with this. These are the kids that really, if you're hearing something at school that says something like, oh well, because of blah blah blah, they didn't have recess today. That is not what these kids need. These kids need to be in recess all the time. They need to be moving and getting all of that input, because that's what's giving them that regulation. It's perhaps the reason why we had the behavior to begin with, is that they needed it. So,
Yeah, definitely. Other proprioceptive strategies. So weighted blankets, those are all the rage now. And as Jen said, some of them can be really heavy. We recommend 10% of the body weight. So if a kiddo is 50 pounds, the max we're looking at is 5 pounds. You really want to not get too heavy, especially with little ones. As adults, maybe some people need that 25-pound one. I would be claustrophobic with it, but I do like the pressure of a light weighted blanket. Bean bags on laps during school tasks. You can cut a pair of leggings, put some pinto beans in it, and it can be a nice weight across your lap, or you can put it around your shoulders. Making sure that these kiddos have that 90-90-90 sitting position. What we mean by that is that their ankles, their feet are flat on the floor, their knees are nicely bent at 90 degrees, and their hips are at 90. That's your way of giving them that extra body awareness that they might be lacking, so that they know where they are in space and that they're secure. Carrying a heavy backpack or weighted clothing, that's more readily available. There are little caps that have weight in them on the top. And then Play-Doh and putty, that is, we're looking at activating those joints. So anytime they're pushing, pulling, carrying, playing with the Play-Doh, you're activating those joints, and that proprioceptive input, what leads to calming neurochemicals being released in your brain. So you're going to be sending a calming message down to your body of, you're safe, you know where you are, here's your body. So we use proprioceptive a lot and pair that a lot with other senses that kiddos might not be able to tolerate as well, because it is such a calmer. It's one of the most powerful ones. Vestibular and proprioceptive are really huge power sensory inputs.
okay, interoception. So basically, as you can tell, that's our gut. That's basically what we're looking at, but there's so many other factors than just our gut. It's basically, how do we feel physically? How is, are we hungry? Are we thirsty? Is our heart rate fast? Are we breathing really quickly or super slowly? Are we having gut issues that is creating constipation, or we're going too much? It's any of that stuff. And we all know, we've faced at least one of these in our lifetime. So we all know when we are constipated or when we have diarrhea, we are not on our game. It's not going to be great. So, this is why it's very important for us to kind of remember this piece, because oftentimes, if our kids are not able to communicate, and they might not understand that they're hungry, but they know something doesn't feel right in their system, or they might not understand that they're constipated, but they know that their belly really hurts bad and they don't know why. So these are super hard for them to communicate a lot of times, but yet create a lot of impact.
So that interoception treatment strategies, what we're going to look at is, how do we create a great sensory flow to their day? And what's most important for them is routine, that things become more predictable. So those kiddos that don't quite know when they're hungry or full, either they're eating all the time or they never say they're hungry, having a time for meals and snacks, that becomes more routine, to kind of train the brain into knowing that they're hungry or they're satiated. A lot of our kiddos that start off with hard beginnings with feeding tubes, or all night feeding or all day feeding, 24-hour feeding. They don't get those cycles very well, and that interoception is off, that they don't know that those feelings of hunger and satiation. These are kiddos that have a lot of time with bed and nap routines. Either they're tired and yawning all the time and never quite awake, or most likely we hear they don't sleep, that they don't understand, they don't have those good routines, those good feelings of knowing when it's time to go to sleep or how to calm themselves in order to sleep. Um, Interoception toileting routines become really difficult if you have a kiddo that is interoception wise under responding. They're not feeling when their bladder's full, and they need to go. They can be really hard potty trainers, or they don't really understand that how to have a bowel movement and how to use those internal muscles, with it. So we're talking about all those kinds of internal things, and it's outside routines and rhythms that help to teach those things too. We want to make sure they're not snacking all day, that we start to teach them how to, have meal times and snacks and what that feels like. Um, Also for regulation, Jen touched on like the heart rate and becoming dysregulated, and those feelings of anxiety that you feel where you have like twinges in your heart. It actually feels like you're having a heart attack, or you'll feel numbness or tingling, and that's all anxiety. Those are those feelings, and we're going to use those same tools that we would use for anxiety. So yoga's huge for calming the mind and calming the body and getting more awareness of your internal senses of anxiety, of hunger, sleep, um, feeling calm, feeling excited, feeling down and blue. We're going to teach those things. And that's not something that comes naturally to everybody, of understanding that, oh, they're really worried. They're actually not really mad. I think I see a lot with our kids that they'll be happy or mad. And those are their two feelings that they'll label. And we have to really work to understanding, oh, you're not feeling mad. You're feeling embarrassed. Embarrassed is a big feeling, or you're feeling worried. And so really feeling like, what is it going on in your body? Oh, your heart's racing. So that might make you feel like you're mad, but you're actually worried or nervous, and labeling those things for them. There's several programs out there, zones of regulation, conscious discipline. Um, it's all over the place. Self-regulation programs nowadays, they're also becoming more mainstream, and socio-emotional learning is more prevalent in schools as well. But I love the conscious discipline, calm down breathing, just learning how to control your breath. And I think that when we use that as adults, we're surprised that we don't use it more often too, because we do have control to be able to understand our body and where it is and how we can control those more internal things that are going on.
So it's really important that we look at this. I mean, there's so many things that have to all go together in order for us to be regulated. It's kind of a miracle, honestly, that any of us are regulated, right? I mean, as we've gone through this, I mean, I know every single time that Beth and I do this, I'm like, oh, this kid that of my own children, oh, I didn't even realize that this kid did that or whatever. And every time I pick something else up, it's just amazing how our body works together. And it's important for us to put all of these things together so that we are regulated, so that we do have a wonderful day. And it's important for all of us, right? But how do we do that?
It is, and we alluded to this earlier, of just creating, some people call it a sensory diet. I like to say more of a sensory flow to the day. I think it's hard to prescribe certain things at certain times because our bodies are changing, and also I think in family life, things are crazy, that if we say we're gonna get on the trampoline every day at 1 p.m., how often can that happen? But if we are using every opportunity to give our kid either respecting their sensory boundaries or increasing their sensory input when they're seeking it, We can look at more of a sensory flow to the day. As Jen and I described of ourselves, you're usually a mixed profile. You're going to be typically developing in some ways, then you're going to be over responsive in some areas and under responsive. And honestly, it changes day to day. And I think that probably as we're talking about these things, Jen, I know I'm thinking like, I'm okay with that sometimes, but when I'm really stressed out, I'm not okay with it. And so how you are in that day and how full your bucket is so that you have room for coping um, is really a huge piece of this. And knowing it's, I know it can be frustrating as a parent to, you wore socks yesterday. Why are you now having this huge fit over your socks? But knowing that it can be just day to day, and for that kiddo, perception is everything. And if it feels like it is driving them crazy, it is driving them crazy. They're not trying to make your life harder or their life harder. It's just that their system is different today. And that's why you need a bag of tricks. What works one time does not work the next. And having a variety of things to pull from and just a new way of looking at that whole behavioral outcome of sensory processing is good, because I think that it's a little bit of a relief to have a cause and to know that it's something external to it rather than a choice. Um, being a sensory detective, knowing your own sensory preferences and your emotional or behavioral reactions is huge. Making sure that you understand yourself, because then that can help you to understand others.
So, this is why this is so important, because our kids, like Beth said, it's not that they're choosing to make life difficult. That's not what it is. It's not just a behavior, as in the sense of what a lot of us think of as bad behavior. It's not that, because kids will do well when they can. So, how and why there's that behavior? So, this, I love this example or this illustration here because, I come from the old school. I'm just going to be honest. I've been in this field for 30 years. And when I came out of school, first of all, as a speech pathologist, we don't get a lot of training anyway with sensory. And most of what I've learned has been through um, hands on great OTs that I've gotten to work with and learning as much as I can through the last 30 years. But when I came out, we looked at the old way of thinking, which is this top one. And basically, we're on the top and we're looking at that behavior as being defiant, or they're escaping, or they're avoiding, or they're attention seeking. And that's how we perceived a lot of the behavior that we were seeing. But, now we've had that really important paradigm shift where we actually get down in the dirt and we start trying to figure out what it is. Where are those sensory processing things happening? What is going on with that emotional regulation or dysregulation? What kind of motor challenges? That could be frustrating in and of itself if they can't motorically do what they're in their brain wanting to do. That's frustrating. Do they have some learning disabilities that are causing some of this? And a big one that we're seeing more and more is trauma. COVID-19, believe it or not, has created a lot of trauma for our little bitties all the way up through school. We've seen it. There's a rise in anxiety, there's a rise in depression with our little one. There's just not even understanding this world that they live in. So it's really important that we jump in the hole, we dig deeper with them to try to figure it out, rather than standing up on our platform and saying, oh, it's just a behavior. And as a parent, you are the best advocate no matter what, because you know your child, you know what you're seeing on a daily basis, and you can be the best advocate for that child in the different settings that they'll be in. So, unfortunately, because we are recorded, we can't have your questions. But if you do have questions, our contact is here, and we are more than happy to answer any questions that you have for us. We really appreciate your time. We hope that this has been extremely helpful for you and for your family. And if there's anything that Tots to Teens can do to assist you in trying to figure out the next steps for you and your child, we're always here for you.
Thank you.